Hello and welcome back to the Patient First Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Laskin. And as always, I'm glad to see you. And we have a titan in the industry today, Kerry Straine, who is the CEO of Straine Dental Management. Kerry has consulted with numerous dental support organizations and dental supply companies to increase their business of dentistry knowledge, improve their operational efficiencies, and deliver significant financial results, as he did for my practice when I had it. So thank you for that. Mr. Straine is called the data whisperer in the dental analytics software field for his validated research and optimization formulas, and the secret weapon by private equity firms who've engaged Straine to help them understand how to support clinical providers and optimize performance of their organizations. Kerry, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Doctor. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, and I mean, you've had an interesting journey in dentistry, and you I believe, started off as an accountant, and then have moved into consulting for thousands of dental practices. How can you tell me a little bit about that transition and why that occurred?
Yeah, it was accidental, Brian. I mean, I never really intended to target the dental industry as the final landing spot for my career. I wanted to work with my dad and my brother, Harry and Larry, and I'm Kerry Straine in our accounting firm, which I began doing when I graduated from college way back in the 70s, end of the 70s. And my dad retired. My brother passed away by 1989, and coincidentally, sleep apnea took him from us back on June 27th of 1989. But it was about that time, or a little bit before that, that one of my accounting clients, who was a dentist, asked me to help him grow his business, and I told him I didn't know how. I just prepared his financial statements and his tax returns. And so he asked me to go to lunch with him, and through the conversation, I learned that this dentist had a desire to grow. That was why we were having lunch and why we were exploring some thoughts. He had a 3 operatory practice back in 88, 89. We've known each other for over 50 years, since we were 14 when we met on the sports fields of our neighboring junior high schools, and all through high school we played sports in the same arena. But we got to know each other after we returned back to Sacramento from dental school. And through the years, we went and had this meeting in which we discovered that he wanted to grow. He had 3 treatment rooms, and he explained to me his protocol for coming up with a diagnosis for his patients. Through that process, I discovered that he had an abundance of dentists or patients in the practice, about 3,000, and he only had room for about 500 in his hygiene department. And I asked him why he didn't expand his hygiene department beyond one hygienist. He said, "I don't have any room." I said, if you got all this patient demand, why don't you go buy another building? And he says, okay. And he expanded, and 5 operatories became more and more and more. And through that course of that relationship, I had to learn how a dental practice was supposed to be run. And there was a lot of good information out there by other consultants at the time. They'd created a lot of books. We just twisted it for the doctor's vision and values. And that one dentist became 10, became 20, became 30. And finally, I sold the accounting firm to the accountants that worked with me, because I had begun in California working with Patterson Dental way back when in the early 90s. And they formed an alliance with me and their 4 centers in California that grew to national level in 1995 with the original CEO, Pete Frechette, amazing gentleman in the dental industry. I reported to someone there in the marketing department, and we continued with CE courses all over the country. That grew all the way through the end of the century, until that marketing director ended up going to work for Henry Schein. And then in early part of this century, I was introduced to their leadership and the program they had at Henry Schein called Career Development, where they were training their sales force on the business of dentistry. I was asked to participate, and we had a great 17-year relationship that finished up around 2018. By then, I'd worked with over 4,000 dental practices, all sizes. Typically, though, the clients that worked with us were already very successful, wanting to go to the next level. Typical entry level is a $2 million practice and up, looking to get bigger. Somebody who has an appetite for accomplishment and results, wanting to perfect how their business supports their clinical purpose, is why we get involved. And along the way, I worked with some very large group practices. In 1999, I met the CEO for Heartland Dental, began working with them and the CFO, and had a great several-year relationship with them. And the private equity firms along the way understand that I can look at a set of data and let them know what's going on in terms of clinical response, economic and administrative perspective so that we can develop goals and strategies to attain them that will allow them to optimize the performance subject to the dentist or the clinical officer's clinical philosophy. Because if you aren't building a business plan that's got the endorsement of your doctors and hygienists and administrators, you're going to get stuck along the way and you're going to hit a ceiling. So it always begins with clinical philosophy first, and then you've got to go up to the front office and through the journey through the treatment rooms to find out administratively how are we going to get this job done according to this new philosophy, and then what outcome are we expecting, and does it make clinical, administrative, and economic sense? And if it did, we put those strategies into operating policies, and through the management system, we led the talent on the team to understand what they were to do, when they were to do it, and what they were expected to accomplish. And that's where the management system or the strain management system came into play. So we've worked with, like I said, thousands of practices. And when 2016, many of my clients were asking me, since you've worked with all these other DSOs and you've worked on behalf of private equity firms that have asked you to get involved, or just whoever the sponsor was, why don't you form your own DSO? And so I contacted two people. Number one, I got a hold of a client of mine who was involved with a large DSO and asked him, who would you recommend for an attorney to help build the DSO model you're looking to build? And I got his name. And I contacted my old friend, Jeff Stacer, who was the founding CFO for Heartland Dental. And he worked with them for years and finished up in '05 and had been on the sidelines doing other things. And I called them both, the attorney and Jeff, and said, I want you to test my hypothesis. But what I want to build is a DSO that enables Straine clients to sell to the Straine Dental Management LLC, to our DSO, and in exchange for cash and stock in our holding company, make a multi-year commitment, because I didn't want to do it alone. If you don't have practice level leadership and that's understood how they built this model in place for years, it's going to be too much work, and you have a lot of doctor turnover, which leads to staff turnover, which leads to problems with revenue meeting the goals of the DSO. When that happens, as it is today, you've got a decline in revenue and collections and EBITDA, and you're testing the covenants of your agreements with your equity firms or with your lenders. And when you do that, it can starve off the cash flow for your operation. So making sure you have the right leadership in the field, the right management leadership in the platform is absolutely essential. And I told my doctors, I'm glad, I would be happy to lead that charge if they would all be committed as well. And we introduced it to them in a focus group meeting in 2017. And we launched our, if you will, management services group in 2018. And I said to the group of doctors, I want you to demonstrate a commitment to me for several years. And come around 2019-20, we'll go to market and find out who we're going to help us fund this transaction. Well, we got interrupted by COVID for a year. And in 2021, we went back and had our quality of earnings report prepared on the group and engaged our investment banker. And in 2022, we funded the acquisition of 39 practices with a debt instrument. So we didn't have to raise equity capital. So as of today, over 85% of the company is owned by the founding dentists, and they are the equity firm. And as we acquire more and more practices today, we're using cash, but we're also, I think a point of distinction is we want everybody to have equity at the holdco level. Because if you're going to sell in my opinion, to a DSO and make a commitment back, if you're going to stick around for a number of years, you should get the equity for making that commitment and performing. So you got to put in the time, you got to continue to achieve the results, you got to keep on delivering what you sold to the group for. And if you do, you're going to get an equity play, just like the equity firms want it. They want a quadruple return on their investment or more. You should be in line to do that. And that was the motivation for me, Bryan, to put all of that into our story of our careers and our journeys. And I'm excited to be leading the charge for truly a doctor-led organization today. And so our company today consists of both the DSO and Straine Consulting. So whether we're working with a practice owner who doesn't want to sell out to a DSO, or elects at some point in time to sell a partial amount of their EBITDA or all of it to SDM, we're a candidate to consider. And we're excited to help people optimize their performance every day in our consulting world. And we're thrilled to help them release the equity that they can't get any other way in our DSO.
Well, thank you for that. I think what's interesting, it's a long journey, and congratulations on all your success and all the great insight and perspective you bring to dentistry. And every DSO is different, and I think you did a phenomenal job of kind of laying out how strain dental management is different. And for those that are listening that aren't familiar with DSOs, I like to listen to things at 2x speed. I would play this at about 0.75 speed, just so you can wrap your head around it. And for those that are involved with DSOs, probably clearly understand the differentiations that you have. And I want to ask you about a couple of them. So number one, you distinctly highlighted the lack of private equity in in the DSO, which I guess I would say I would appreciate knowing how now, after having sold my practices to a private equity backed DSO, and realizing that there's this 3.8-year flip that they're doing that I think is not necessarily in the long term interest of practices. Let me put it that way, right? Is that so? Is part of your thesis to avoid that?
Absolutely. Typically, you see a small DSO come to life with 5, 10, 15 offices. There's been some initial capital that the founding member or founding dentist has put up and made money along the way, and hasn't spent all of their ordinary income they've earned every year. They've actually invested it. So they have the capital to buy location 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you can usually go to a bank locally and get that financing of some multiple of your EBITDA, 3 times the multiple or 4 times called a debt covenant. But once you reach a ceiling and the bank's not going to lend you anymore, or those lenders disappear, then it opens the door for an investment banker to come in with somebody a little more sizable. But you need to be at a certain critical income level and EBITDA level to attract that. And if not that, you're going to bring a private equity firm in play. Private equity firm isn't making a lifelong investment in a career. They have a window of time where they deploy capital and then they want to get it back. So you mentioned 3.8 years. That might be a little sooner than most, but for our clients and what we see in the industry, it's typically 4.5 to 5.5 years, especially when you have a dip like we're experiencing right now, because now's not a good time here in 2023, October 31st. Happy Halloween. It's not a good time to be out seeking capital because interest rates are very expensive relative to the last 15 years.
You'd say it's spooky.
It's spooky, but let me just say the big concern, and your observation is shared, but your concern is shared by me. The flipping of the portfolio. The portfolio is the group of practices where the assets are owned by the DSO and they have a long-term administrative services agreement with the seller that's assigned when they put in their own friendly PC owner to take control of those practices. All that long-term setup in place to manage that cash flow stream and have a doctor leading the charge, if hopefully they are. And then the owner of that DSO can sell out their practices to another DSO, and their interests are to get their capital back and the highest amount of return for the least amount of time with the least amount of risk for the benefit of their shareholders or their families. That's what they want. They're not into it to own it 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That private equity group may create a fund next time that goes into the nursery business or the restaurant business or the technology business. But right now, a dental investment is part of a healthcare fund that was set up typically that a sliver or a percentage of the amounts raised go into the dental community. Another sliver might go into veterinarian. Another sliver may go into dermatology. It could go into orthopedic surgery, whatever that is. But once they sell out, their interest to stay in that field or in that investment is no longer exists. So they're in the business of aggregating, stacking up the EBITDA, hopefully some same-store sales growth. They talk about double-digit same-store sales growth. We know what that is. I've been consulting to know what that means, and I know how to make that happen. That's why we're known as the data whisperer or the secret weapon, because when we look at an investment, our investors want to make sure that they're going to be able to grow accordingly so they get the highest amount of return for their investment. But at Straine, I have no desire to sell off the platform and the leadership and the management to a majority of the to candidates who would run it like a majority of the DSOs are run today, where they just want to flip out. There are not many true long-term operators in the DSO space. There are some great ones, don't get me wrong. I know them, or you know them by reputation and you see what they've accomplished. They're the ones that when when we go through a period of consolidation, they will be the remaining DSOs, whether they're part of healthcare organizations in the future or publicly traded companies for access to capital. I think you and I can only speculate. But there aren't that many qualified DSOs out there that really understand the difference between a Profi and a Tootsie Roll, and B, want to be in healthcare any longer than they need to be just to achieve their objective, which is getting the highest return they can.
Well, I'm going to state my perspective, which I think is very much redundant to yours, but I think bears mentioning. So in my experience, which has been pretty extensive over the last several years with DSOs, I have found that exactly the same thing what you're talking about private equity. Now, the 3.8 years is the average hold of a private equity firm, which isn't the average hold in dentistry, which is probably longer, like you're saying, you 4.5, 5.5 years, whatever. However, one of the reasons why that is problematic is when you hit a period of time like we have right now, where capital is expensive, and and look, let's face it, there's so many people that walk around saying that they're dental consultants. And typically speaking, I found that you found somebody who worked the business office of a moderately successful dental practice because the dentist was a nice person, did quality dentistry, and they feel like, well, I ran this place, I should go talk to everybody else about how to run a dental practice. That's one version of a dental consultant. That ain't Kerry Straine, right? You know this business through and through. So you're a high, like a well-respected high-end business consultant. And my point of saying that is that what I see with private equity run DSOs is that when they have issues like they're having right now, and people talk about same store growth, which is the buzz right now in the DSO community, it's like, I was going to say it like, you know, it's like if you make electric cars and then you buy a social media platform, totally different business. I mean, right? It's a totally different business, aggregating practices and growing dental practices. And in my experience, there's only one way that they grow, and it's by cutting the bottom line. And so what they end up doing is cutting off their appendages to keep the trunk alive. So at this moment in time, that's what's going on. And they're looking around going, how do we actually grow these practices? Because we've never even thought about doing this before, when that has been your business from the offset. So, so I appreciate what you're doing. And I guess, again, I think really all I'm doing is restating what you said from my perspective. But I guess my question is that, are you in agreement with what I said?
No, I think your observation is absolutely correct. Most dental consultants are trainers of a way they learned at a superb dental operator like yourself. And you have a manager who wants to grow and has ambition to become more influential and do more for their own personal career. And through the local dental association or your circle of friends, other dentists come up to them and say, gosh, Phil, if the person's name is Phil, I really wish I had you. And so if that person comes to you and says, well, do you mind, Dr. Laskin, if I maybe cut back one day a week, and I'll still oversee your operations, but I want to take on this client one day a week. And then it becomes 2, 3, 4, and 5. And charging $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month for most of them. You pick up 10 clients, all of a sudden you're making 20 grand a month. You can never make that as an administrator for a sole practitioner. And for them, it's the highest and best use of their time. Really understanding the consequences of their recommendations is what a consultant should be doing, no matter what industry you're in. But when all you know is a trainer of a way, you're a good trainer. And in some cases, I mean, if someone wants a model that looks like yours, and I can train on that, and I don't want to experience any other variable that would cause me to be flustered, then I can deliver that model because I learned that from it's not my way, it's the Laskin way. And I've seen that over the years. And those people do very well, but they're really not consulting in terms of analyzing and making recommendations, as again, taking into context the doctor's clinical philosophy first, then administratively, what can get done, organizationally, and economically. Because ultimately, whether you're working for a DSO or an individual sole practice owner or a small group of dentists that own a practice, everybody has an expectation economically of what they want to get in exchange for what they signed up for and give money, capital, risk, time to. They should have an understanding, what am I going to get for that? Whether it's an employee of ours or whether it's one of our owners, whether it's an administrator who just begins a job at a dental office and may make $20 to $30 an hour, or it's a seasoned hygienist in San Francisco that's making $90 an hour. And the responsibilities that they have taking that position to learn that organization's philosophy and way of doing things so the system can guide them to drive revenues of 3 to 3.33 times that hourly rate for a hygienist or something else for another team member. Everybody gets to a level of maximizing their economic opportunity. Unfortunately, for 95% of Americans, Brian, they're not funding their retirement. They're not establishing working capital reserves. They're borrowing on the credit, thinking that that money tree at the job is still going to exist, and it doesn't necessarily. I think we're in line for some significant economic challenges in the recession ahead. And if you don't understand the core basics of what drive patient flow, production, cash flow, overhead management, and profitability, if you want to call it EBITDA or just profitability, you're going to be in deep trouble, because you can have a slight imbalance as a result of, for example, for a general dentist, where do you stand in your continuing care numbers today versus last year versus the year before? Are you increasing the patient visits in prophies and perio maintenance and child prophies, all the recurring flows? Don't get distracted with everything else. If you don't have seats in the seats, all those other elements to a treatment plan can't be presented and accepted. So we've got a lot of challenges in the market today, and we have to roll up our sleeves and solve them for our consulting clients, for our analytic clients, and of course our DSO clients. But together with the DSO clients, they're committed dentists and team members that want to be first in this sector to deliver the greatest experience for the patient, for the team. And when that's aligned, the economic models should be achieved.
Yeah, and one of the
I will say, eventually, there will be a place with the size that we expect to go to for a form of capital to be provided, but it's not now. Right now, we do it with lending, and I didn't want to carve out the equity growth in these early years for the doctors who had an interest in capitalizing on it. And to this day, those that do, we're a choice for them to consider.
That's great. And we've talked a lot about sort of the economics of the DSO that you're building, because I think it's important. And one of my favorite quotes that I got from the consultant that I worked through Strain was, the numbers tell a story, right? And for the dental professionals that are listening, or the patients that are listening that think, boy, this is all economics. Well, as we elevate people's oral health in dentistry, right, that hits the numbers ultimately. And that's how we can quantify how well we're elevating people's oral health, or in this case, elevate the health of practices so that they can deliver the best quality care available, right? You can't deliver the best quality care, invest in technology, if you're losing money. And so these have to be viable businesses with, I believe, the right investing horizon, so that then we can align our perspectives, like you're saying, so that we can deliver the best quality of care. So where, if for people that are listening that want to find out more, where should people go?
Well, they can certainly go to our website and seek an appointment there through our calendar availability, or they can contact me at my name is my email address. It's Kerry, Kerry, at Straine, with an E on the end, .com. And reach out to me, or reach out through us to the website. And if you have an interest in exploring what we do and how we serve, we're happy to talk to anybody. We always have. We've done over, I think, 20,000 consults over the last 30 plus years with doctors all over the country, and we still do them to this day. And don't be afraid to have a discussion. I just want to give someone, and my team wants to give someone, just an opinion about where if we understand where they are and where they want to be, how they might get from where they are to where they want to be. And I think, again, with the challenges of the dental practice owners face, having a third party just to bounce some ideas off is very important. And we're happy to have that consultation. If it leads into consulting or analytics or even a DSO, that might be a good next step. But I think everything begins with the first step. Let's just open the door and have a conversation.
Yeah, so I would urge everybody to check out Straine Consulting, Straine Consulting. Yeah, thank you, Kerry, very much for being on the podcast and for all that you do for dentistry.
Thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be on this call with you. And thanks again for inviting us into your practice years ago, Bryan.
Of course.